They say betrayal doesn't kill you, it teaches you how to kill. Slowly, quietly, without anyone suspecting until it's too late. My father always told me blood was thicker than water. That family came first, no matter what. But when the time came for him to prove those words, he cut me open with the same hands that once held me as a child. He didn't stab me with a knife, though. No, his weapon was far sharper. He signed a piece of paper, a deed, a betrayal so deep that it stripped away everything I thought I was. That house wasn't just four walls and a roof. It was my sanctuary, my inheritance, the last piece of my mother who had passed away years before. But in one meeting, with one decision, my father gave it away. Not to me, his child, but to my cousin. You want to know what hurt the most? It wasn't just losing the house. It was watching my cousin move in like a vulture circling a fresh corpse. The smug smile, the mocking tone, the whispered jokes behind my back. They thought I was powerless. They thought I would bow my head, swallow my pride, and accept the scraps left behind. They were wrong, because while my cousin was busy decorating my living room and bragging about their new status, I was quietly studying their life, their weaknesses, their arrogance, and more importantly, the very company they depended on. This isn't just a story about losing everything. This is a story about patience, silence, and the kind of revenge that leaves scars money can't fix. And when I tell you what I did to them live, in front of everyone, you'll understand why silence is the sharpest weapon of all. I grew up in a house where loyalty was spoken of like a sacred law, but practiced like a weapon. My father, Arif, was the head of the family in every way, respected in the community, feared in the household. He wasn't cruel in the obvious sense. He never raised a hand against me. His cruelty came in subtler, sharper forms: favoritism, silence, decisions that cut without explanation. My mother, Layla, was the only buffer. She had a way of softening his edges, of reminding him that children weren't soldiers, but fragile things that needed warmth. When she passed away, something in the house shifted. The air grew heavier. Conversations turned into orders and love. Well, love became something you earned through obedience. I was the only child, at least the only direct child. But our extended family was large. Uncles, aunts, and cousins moved in and out of our lives like tides. One cousin in particular, Danielle, was my father's unspoken favorite. He wasn't smarter than me, nor more accomplished. But he was charming. He knew how to flatter, how to twist himself into whatever shape my father admired most. Danielle has vision, my father would say at dinners, eyes bright with pride. He'll carry our name forward. Meanwhile, I sat across the table, invisible, chewing on food that tasted like ashdot, you see. The house I lived in wasn't just any house. It was my mother's. She inherited it from her side of the family. A beautiful two-story with old stone walls and a courtyard that smelled of jasmine in summer. After she died, it became mine in spirit, though the paperwork was tied up with my father. Everyone knew it was supposed to be passed to me. Everyone except, apparently, my father. From early on, I noticed how Daniel's presence grew like a shadow over my life. He was at every family gathering, every decision-making meeting. My father trusted him with business details he never shared with me. When I suggested helping at the company, our family's textile firm, he brushed me off. You don't have the head for business. He told me one night, sipping tea as though it was the most natural insult in the world. But Danielle does. I asked, bitterness creeping into my tone. Danielle has initiative. You have dreams. That's different. Dreams. He spat the word like poison. I wanted to scream, to remind him that I studied harder, stayed up nights preparing ideas, and even shadowed managers without being asked. But no matter what I did, Danielle always had his attention, his approval, his trust. The conflict grew over years. Every time I suggested improvements, my father dismissed me. Every time Danielle spoke, it was gospel. Soon, relatives began echoing the favoritism. Danielle is practically like a son, my uncle once said. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Practically like a son? What did that make me then? A guest in my own bloodline? One evening, at a family dinner, I overheard Danielle joking with one of our aunts. You know, Uncle Arif should just give me the house, he said, laughing. And my father, my own father, chuckled. He chuckled, as if the idea wasn't absurd, as if it was possible. That was the first night I felt the pit in my stomach turn into fire. The disrespect only escalated. Danielle started acting as though he already owned the place. He'd drop comments like, when I repaint the living room, or that courtyard could use a fountain, don't you think? Always with that smug grin. Always loud enough for me to hear. I confronted my father once, unable to keep the anger down. Why do you let him talk like that? This house is Mom's. It's supposed to be mine. His expression hardened. Don't be ungrateful. Danielle respects me. He doesn't question me the way you do. Respect. He's circling like a vulture. Watch your mouth, he snapped, slamming his cup down so hard the porcelain cracked. That night, lying in my bed, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning endlessly. I realized something horrifying. In my father's eyes, I would never be enough. The tension wasn't just about the house. It bled into daily life. Family gatherings became unbearable. Danielle's jokes turned sharper, veiled as humor, but dripping with malice. Careful, he'd say when I voiced an opinion. Don't strain yourself with all that thinking. Leave the business to us. Laughter followed. Always laughter. And my father never corrected him. Neighbors noticed too. Your father must be proud of Danielle, one said casually at the market. I smiled weakly, but inside I wanted to scream. Proud of Danielle. Not me. Never me. I tried to build my own path. I worked side jobs, saved money, kept my distance. But the house loomed over everything, a reminder of my mother, of promises broken, of a legacy slipping through my fingers. I thought maybe if I proved myself outside, my father would finally see me. Maybe he would regret dismissing me, but respect never came. Only silence. The breaking point came on my birthday. My father gathered everyone, cousins and all, for a dinner. I thought foolishly that maybe this time he'd show me recognition. That maybe I'd get a word of praise, a gesture, anything. Instead, after the cake, he raised his glass. To Danielle, he said warmly, for being the future of this family. Applause filled the room. I sat frozen, my slice of cake untouched. Danielle smirked at me across the table, lifting his glass in mock salute. My chest burned, but I said nothing. I didn't trust my voice not to break. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed every word, every laugh, every smug grin. Something shifted in me, like a crack spreading through glass. I knew the storm was coming. I could feel it in my bones. And when it finally hit, when the betrayal was written on paper and signed with my father's hand, I wasn't surprised. Devastated, yes. Broken, absolutely. But surprised? No, because betrayal doesn't happen in one moment. It builds drop by drop until the cup spills over. And in my family, the cup had been overflowing for years. The day it happened started like any other. That's the cruelty of betrayal. It doesn't announce itself with thunder or storms. It comes dressed in normalcy, disguised as routine, until it tears your life apart with surgical precision. I woke to the sound of voices in the courtyard. Danielle's laugh, light and mocking, mixed with my father's deeper tone. I didn't think much of it at first. Danielle was always here, always glued to my father's side. But when I walked downstairs, I saw papers spread across the dining table. Legal documents. My chest tightened. What's this? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. My father looked up, his face calm, almost too calm. We're finalizing some transfers. Danielle smirked, leaning back in the chair like he already owned the place. His eyes glittered with amusement as though this was a show staged for his entertainment. Transfers? I repeated, my stomach dropping. What transfers? My father's silence was answer enough. My hand shook as I reached for the papers. The words blurred at first, but then one sentence stood out, bold and merciless. Deed of transfer, property title. My house. My mother's house. And the new owner listed in black ink, Danielle Ahmed. For a moment, the world went silent. The courtyard, the birds, the chatter outside, it all disappeared into a ringing void. You... My voice cracked, my throat raw. You gave him the house. My father didn't meet my eyes. He sipped his tea as if nothing monumental had just happened. It's better this way. Danielle has the discipline to take care of it. Better? I whispered. For who? For you? For him? My chest heaved. This house was Mom's. It was supposed to be mine. Finally, he looked at me. His gaze was cold, unyielding. Your mother is gone, and you've always been too emotional. Danielle will bring honor to this place. You would waste it. The words landed harder than any slap. Too emotional. That was my crime. Loving the house that held my mother's memory. Wanting to preserve it instead of turning it into a stage for Danielle's vanity. Danielle's grin widened. He leaned forward, voice dripping with mock sympathy. Don't take it personally, cousin. Business is business. My vision blurred with tears. Rage clawed at my throat, but I swallowed it down. Screaming would give them satisfaction. Breaking down would prove them right. Instead, I turned and walked out, every step heavier than the last. My father's voice followed me. You'll thank me one day. I didn't answer. If I had, the words would have burned the room to ash. The days after felt like wandering through a nightmare. Danielle moved into the house almost immediately. I was forced to pack my belongings, boxing up not just clothes and books, but memories. The smell of my mother's jasmine still lingered in the courtyard, clinging to me as I carried box after box out the door. Danielle watched from the balcony, sipping coffee, his smirk never faltering. Careful with that vase, he called once. It's mine now. I wanted to hurl it at his face. Instead, I set it down gently, my hands trembling. Family gossip spread like wildfire. Aunts whispered, uncles nodded knowingly, neighbors shook their heads. Some pitied me. Most praised Danielle. Your father is wise, one relative told me. He knows who can handle responsibility. Responsibility. That's what they called theft. That's what they called betrayal. Nights were the hardest. I found myself lying awake in the small rented flat I had scraped together, staring at bare walls that felt nothing like home. I could still picture Danielle redecorating my mother's living room, tearing down her curtains, repainting her walls, erasing her from existence. And my father helping him, approving. One evening, I gathered the courage to confront him again. I visited his office, the place where he always seemed untouchable. He sat behind his mahogany desk, pen scratching against paper. Why? I asked simply. My voice was steady, but inside I was trembling. Why him? Why not me? He didn't look up. You wouldn't understand. Danielle is like the son I always wanted. The words hollowed me out. Like the son I always wanted. I left before he could see the tears. The humiliation didn't stop there. Danielle made sure of it. He hosted gatherings at the house my house, inviting relatives, business partners, even old school friends. He posted photos online, him lounging in the courtyard, him standing by the old oak door, him drinking tea on the balcony. Every post felt like a knife twisting deeper. Once, out of sheer masochism, I went to one of those gatherings. Daniel spotted me instantly. "Ah, the guest of honor," he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. Laughter rippled through the crowd. I clenched my fists, forcing a smile, nodding politely while my insides screamed "Dot" as the night dragged on. I overheard whispers. "Poor thing. Lost everything to his cousin. Should have been smarter." It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was humiliation, public and relentless, that night. After leaving the gathering early, I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My chest ached with fury, my vision blurred with rage. And in that suffocating silence, one thought crystallized in my mind. They will pay Dot not with words, not with anger, but with silence, with patience, with precision. I stopped arguing with my father. I stopped rising to Daniel's provocations. On the surface, I looked defeated, another broken arrow cast aside. But beneath that mask, a fire was building. I began watching Daniel more closely. His company dealings, his partnerships, his careless spending. I noticed cracks he tried to hide. A late payment here, a reckless investment there. He was charming, yes. But beneath the veneer, he was sloppy, entitled, weak. Dot and my father. He was blind to it, blinded by favoritism, by the illusion of competence. I, however, was not. While they mocked me, I was learning. While they flaunted their victory, I was preparing mine, because betrayal doesn't end with the wound. It plants a seed, and that seed, when watered with silence, grows into something far more dangerous. That night, sitting in the dark of my apartment, I whispered aloud for the first time, "They think they've won. Let them think so. For now." And with that vow, the fire inside me turned cold. Cold enough to plan. Cold enough to wait. Cold enough to strike when the time was right. I learned a new skill after the house was taken, how to be invisible while moving. Not the kind you see in movies, no cloaks or magic. The kind where you smile, nod, and then do the thing they never see coming. It started small, watching, listening, taking mental notes. Then it grew into a plan with clear steps, each one cold and clean. First, information. I needed everything about Daniel's life. Not the gossip or the Instagram photos, but the scaffolding beneath his pride. Who loaned him money? Which clients trusted him without checking? What board members were careless? I dug through public records, business filings, old social media posts. I showed up at the textile firm pretending to deliver samples. I volunteered at charity events his company sponsored. People talk when they assume you're harmless. They always do. Second, always. I couldn't do this alone. I reached out to people Daniel had burned, quiet employees he'd cut without severance, a supplier he stiffed, a mid-level manager he'd humiliated at a meeting. They had grudges and I had patience. I didn't promise revenge up front. I offered a simple currency, respect. I listened. I validated. I offered them small, realistic roles in what I hinted would be a plan to restore order jobs. Protection, a way to get dignity back. They joined because I treated them like adults, not pawns. Third, credibility. I needed a reason to be taken seriously in the business world. So I built one. I used the savings I kept hidden. I registered a small holding company, bought a stake in a logistics startup, then another. It wasn't flashy. It was boring and legal, and most importantly, it gave me a seat at tables Daniel assumed he owned. I learned to read balance sheets. I learned negotiation. I interviewed mentors and hired a discreet corporate lawyer who didn't ask many questions. Fourth, pressure points. Daniel had a soft spot, vanity, and overconfidence. He loved public attention. He banked on appearances, flashy events, theatrical charitable launches, photos with politicians. He also had debts tied to a risky expansion into a neighboring country. I found the loan records, the guarantors, the clauses that could be triggered with a nudge. You can topple a man of ego by cutting off the stage lights. The plan was surgical. First, isolate his cash flow. We quietly negotiated terms with a few of his largest suppliers, the ones he took for granted, offering slightly better credit to him if he consolidated suppliers, language that looked helpful but would give us leverage. Next, we positioned our holding company as a neutral investor in a related logistics firm that did a lot of his freight. That gave me legal standing to question invoices and audit routes. We didn't attack openly. We built entanglements, contracts with clauses that would activate if invoices were late, insurance riders that demanded audits, minor audits that could reveal bigger mistakes. I seeded doubt. In boardrooms where Danielle dominated conversations, a former employee I'd helped would mention a misdelivery, a suspicious invoice, or a contract clause someone had overlooked. The kind of things that look like human error. But seen enough times, human error becomes pattern. Trust wobbled. Partners started asking questions. Investors called for reconciliations. Daniel smiled through it all, but his voice grew sharper. Defensiveness came next. Defensiveness is a symptom of fear. I also played the long game with my father. I didn't burn bridges. I sent him benign messages, updates about my small projects, pictures from industry events I attended, curated glimpses of success. I let him overhear gossip that I was doing well. The goal wasn't to rub his nose in anything. It was to replace complacency with curiosity. If he ever checked on me, I wanted him to see a version of me people respected. I wanted him to wonder. Wonder plants a seed of insecurity as powerful as any threat. On the softer side, I nurtured the house's social capital. I quietly funded the courtyard's little garden maintenance for a few months under an anonymous account. I donated to the local mosque in my mother's name and made sure the charity's thank you note referenced the house. Small moves like that kept my presence alive in the neighborhood without exposing my hand. People remember good caretaking. They forgive an absent heir if they think someone else still honors the past. Not all of it was purely tactical. There was a psychological part too. I started to show up in places Danielle expected me not to be. A trade seminar, a luncheon, someone important's wedding. I never made a scene. I wore neutral clothes, spoke calmly, let others do the loud work. But my presence mattered. It was a constant reminder that I was still viable. That made Danielle jittery. Ego hates competition that doesn't roar. There were risks. A few moves rattled the wrong people. A supplier called suspicious. A minor legal tussle threatened to expose my holding company's backers. I tightened the net. I diversified leverage so no single point of failure could crush the entire plan. When one window closed, another opened. That's the advantage of quiet work. It allows you to pivot while they assume you're finished. I also embraced the uncanny. It's strange how superstition can be a tool. I fed small rumors about strange occurrences in the house, lights flickering during Daniel's meetings, minor appliances failing at convenient times, whispers of cold drafts moving through sealed rooms. Nothing criminal, only things that make a man question his luck. People read patterns into small oddities. They prefer to see ghosts than admit they made a grave mistake. If Danielle began to think the house was jinxed, he'd start making emotional decisions. And emotional decisions are predictable. As the pressure mounted, so did small victories. A supplier who'd once ignored us agreed to renegotiate. A client asked for proof of delivery for shipments that had previously been accepted without question. One of Daniel's key investors requested a third-party audit. Each win was quiet. Each win was a thread pulled. The more threads we pulled, the looser his safety net became. By the time the big move came, Daniel was distracted, exhausted, and defensive. He barked orders. He lashed out at staff. He made mistakes, public ones. That's when I accelerated. A well-timed shareholder motion, a sudden audit request, and the revelation of a misreported account created chaos. I didn't have to be loud. I only had to be precise. And all the while, I kept my face calm. I kept my voice low. I would sit in meetings and watch the micro expressions, a flicker of panic at the corner of an eye, a swallow that wasn't necessary. Those little tells told me everything I needed to know. Patience was the hardest part. Revenge is often thought of as a single blow. In reality, it's many small strikes aimed at the architecture of a life. You dismantle the supports, and the rest crumbles under its own weight. When the plan was finally set in motion, it felt less like triumph and more like inevitability. The pieces were aligned. The people who had once been pawns in Daniel's games were now colleagues in mine. My father, still unwilling to face the full truth, watched from the sidelines as his chosen heir began to unravel. I didn't gloat. I let the machinery run. I let silence do its work, because in the end, silence and patience are more brutal than any shout. They make the fall look like fate. They make the ruin look deserved, and I wanted them to feel that. Not only the loss, but the slow clarity that came with it, the knowledge that every choice had consequences, and some consequences were designed in a calm room by a person they underestimated. The day I chose felt ordinary. A midweek shareholders meeting, nothing flashy, scheduled for a late afternoon in a glass boardroom that caught the sun and made everyone look important. Daniel loved that kind of setting, light, cameras, the illusion of transparency. He felt power lived in public rooms. He was wrong. I arrived early. Nobody recognized me at first. I wore a simple gray suit and a face that had learned to do nothing. My holding company had been coalescing quietly for months, a string of small, precise investments that gave me legal standing and votes. I'd set the calendar in motion weeks before, a motion to call an extraordinary general meeting, a petition signed by minor investors we'd shepherded, an auditor request that looked routine on paper but opened the door to everything else. Daniel did not hide his arrogance. He stood at the head of the table, tapping his phone, making jokes, posing for a photo or two. The room hummed with his confidence. My father sat on the side, as if to lend prestige, and a few relatives were sprinkled among the attendees like ornaments. They smiled, nodding like people who had already decided the ending. The meeting began with perfunctory items. Then came the motion. The chairman's voice carried. We have a petition to vote on an extraordinary audit and the appointment of a new majority stakeholder. Daniel's laugh died mid-sip. I could see it, the first tiny fissure that would become a crack. I spoke when the chairman called for comments. I stood, measured my voice, and said, I represent Ars Holdings. We moved to appoint an independent board and to ratify the auditor's findings retroactively. Neutral words, legal, dry, they landed like ice. Daniel smiled at me, indulgent. Who are you to, he began. Someone who worked. I cut in. Someone who listened. The audit was quick because the groundwork had been laid. Paper trails, inconsistent invoices, off-the-books payments, and a string of contracts signed without proper approvals, all compiled by the lawyer I hired and the staffers who had been pushed aside. Each finding was a nail, each discrepancy another layer on the coffin. When the room read the auditor's report, faces paled. Investors muttered. Board members who once followed Daniel's every word shifted in their seats. Trust, that fragile furniture, started to wobble. Then came the legal coup. Ars Holdings exercised the options we'd quietly purchased, options tied to a logistics subsidiary Daniel's company heavily relied on. They were now ours. With those options, we had voting power, seats, authority. The chairman made the announcement. By virtue of the options exercised, Ars Holdings now controls a majority stake. Silence fell. It was the kind of silence that shows the air has been cut. Daniel's jaw worked. He laughed once, high and forced, like someone trying to convince himself the floor wasn't dropping. This is a hostile takeover, he spat, voice sharp. No, I said softly. This is ownership. Legally earned. I called the vote to appoint new directors, my people, competent and quiet. The votes passed. One by one, Daniel's allies found themselves outmaneuvered on paper and outnumbered in the room. The chairman read the new board appointments. I watched Daniel's face as the last name, mine, appeared on the list. The color drained. For the first time in years, he could not hide. The final move was ceremonial and brutal. With the new board in place, we convened an emergency session to address executive conduct. The auditor's findings formed the basis. Conflict of interest clauses, misreported revenues, reckless guarantees. The list read like a confession. I stood and looked at him. Effective immediately, I said. Daniel is relieved of all executive duties and barred from conducting company business pending further investigation. His laugh finally broke into something like a sob. He lunged forward and shouted, "You can't do this. He's my uncle. You built this with borrowed trust," I replied. "You ran it into the ground." My voice was low, steady. "You mistreated employees, falsified reports, and mortgaged reputation for vanity. Today you pay for it." My father's face crumpled in a way that felt like an accusation and a regret both. He didn't stand. He couldn't. In that moment, I saw the man who had signed the deed, and I saw a son he'd never believed in take back what was his in a different currency, competence. Daniel's protests turned to pleading. He begged for mercy, for time, for an explanation. Cameras that had once adored him now soaked up his humiliation like vultures. The board escorted him out amid whispers. A few employees clapped, tentative and shocked. Others wept with relief. It wasn't just professional ruin. The revelation triggered bank covenants and emergency calls. Lenders who had counted on inflated statements froze credit lines. The company's stock, whatever shimmer it had, crumpled under the weight of distrust. Within hours, the man who had declared himself heir had nothing but a name on a creditor's list. Later, as I walked out of the building, the evening air felt thin and electric. News alerts began to ping across phones. People would watch the footage tomorrow. They'd speculate, gossip, rerun the moments in slow motion. My father approached me, silent. He did not hug me. He did not look proud. He only said, almost inaudible, "Why?" "Because you taught me how to be patient," I answered. "Because you taught me who you trusted. And because you taught me what to take." My words weren't triumphant. They were facts, cold and undeniable. Behind us. I could feel the ripple of the house, the quiet house I had lost and preserved in small acts, like a presence. A minor electrical flicker in the glass lobby, a draft that moved through sealed meeting rooms, a vase toppled in a far hallway. Coincidence, perhaps. Or the beginning of the reckoning I had hinted at, the thing that isn't legal but feels like justice. Daniel's empire was not obliterated in one blow. It would take time to settle, lawsuits to unfold, fortunes to be audited. But he had fallen from the stage he loved, and he had done so in front of everyone who had ever applauded him. As I watched him leave. Head low, the room buzzing with murmurs and phones, I realized revenge wasn't an ending, It was the moment the scales finally tipped. It was watching consequences come due in public, measured in votes and signatures and the exacting silence of those who had been wronged. And when I stepped into the cooling dusk, I felt the first real absence of the ache that had lived in my chest for years. It did not fill with joy. It settled into something quieter, a careful, terrible peace. Weeks passed after the boardroom battle, but the silence that followed was louder than any victory cheer. News channels replayed the footage endlessly, Daniel's smile cracking, his voice breaking the moment his crown was yanked from his head. People whispered his name not with admiration anymore, but with pity. The man who believed himself untouchable was suddenly ordinary. Just another headline of hubris and downfall. At home, the phones rang. My father called. My cousins texted. My mother tried to stitch words into apologies, excuses, explanations. But apologies delivered after ruin taste hollow. They said they had no choice, that they didn't see what Danielle was becoming. But I had seen, and they had seen me, and chosen not to. In the weeks after, I visited the old house one last time. The locks had been changed, but I had a copy, one Danielle never thought to ask for. Inside it smelled the same, old wood, faint perfume from long-faded curtains, the kind of scent that carries both comfort and betrayal. I stood in the living room and remembered the night the deed was signed away, when I was treated as if I were invisible. That memory stayed sharp, like gloss under skin. This time I left nothing behind. I walked out without rage, without sorrow, and closed the door for good. That house was no longer my prison, nor was it my inheritance. My inheritance was the knowledge that patience is sharper than anger, and silence can be louder than shouting. People ask if I regret it. Did I go too far? Should I have forgiven? But forgiveness is not owed to those who gamble your existence away for convenience. Forgiveness is earned, not demanded. And sometimes, the only way to balance a scale is to place something heavy on the other side. I didn't ruin Daniel with lies, or fists, or fire. I ruined him with the truth, with the very rules he thought only applied to others. That was the justice that fit. Now I sit in my own apartment, city lights flickering outside, and I feel something I never thought I'd know again: freedom. Freedom from their approval. Freedom from their dismissal. Freedom from needing them to see me. Revenge didn't give me back a family, but it gave me back myself. And maybe that's the real lesson. Respect isn't inherited or handed down like deeds and houses. Respect is demanded deliberately and sometimes painfully. What would you have done in my place?